Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong, like your very presence was a mistake? Imagine boarding a flight after a long day, just wanting to sit quietly in your seat, only to be singled out, humiliated, and told you had no right to be there. Now imagine that the man they tried to push aside wasn't just any passenger, but the director of the very airport they were flying from. What choice do you make in that moment? Do you stay silent to avoid conflict? Do you rise and fight back, or do you hold your ground, calmly, with dignity, knowing the truth will eventually speak louder than anger? If it happened to you, your father, your brother, your friend, how would you feel watching them shrink under unjust eyes? And what would you do if you had the power to turn humiliation into hope? This is not just a story about an airline. It's a story about dignity, about choices under pressure, and about what it takes to create change when the world is watching. Stay with us as we uncover what really happened on Flight 482. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter. The cabin lights glowed a muted amber, the kind of soft warmth airlines use to calm restless passengers before takeoff. Rows of economy seats stretched back in neat lines, each one filled with the ordinary mixture of travelers, business people scrolling their phones, parents juggling restless kids, college students whispering in pairs. The hum of the air vents and the distant thud of bags in overhead bins set the background rhythm. In seat 27B sat a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his early 50s. His posture was relaxed, almost understated, but his eyes carried the kind of quiet depth that made people glance twice. He wore a navy blazer, worn at the elbows, with a crisp white shirt underneath, no flashy jewelry, no laptop out, just a paperback book resting lightly in his lap, a travel novel that looked well thumbed to anyone passing by. He was just another middle-aged man flying economy. But Nathaniel Carter was no ordinary passenger. He was the executive director of Riverton International Airport, one of the busiest airports in the Midwest. The kind of man who oversaw thousands of employees, signed off on million-dollar contracts, and made daily decisions that shaped how millions of people traveled safely each year. Yet today, he chose economy on Apex Air Flight 482. Not because he had to, because sometimes he wanted to see the world from the ground level, to remember what ordinary travelers felt when they boarded a plane. Across the aisle, a young woman named Olivia Brooks adjusted her earbuds, a journalism major. She had the restless energy of someone who noticed details other people missed. 2 rows behind, Michael Harris, a graying former cop, tugged at his jacket and sighed, settling into the middle seat he disliked. Further down the cabin, a young flight attendant named Daniel Ruiz hurriedly helped a family stow a stroller, his nervous energy marked by the way he kept glancing at the purser. And the purser, Karen Mitchell, moved down the aisle with the kind of authority that wasn't just confidence, it was something harder, sharper. She had been with Apex Air for nearly 2 decades, and she wore her seniority like armor. Her voice carried above the low cabin chatter. "Sir," she said suddenly, her tone slicing through the air, "that bag needs to go in the overhead, not under your seat. Regulations." Her gaze was locked on Nathan Carter. Nathan looked down. His carry-on, a standard roller that easily fit under the seat, was tucked neatly at his feet. He had traveled enough to know the rules. His voice was calm, low, the kind of tone that didn't rise to meet aggression. "It's within regulation size, ma'am. Fits just fine here." Karen's lips pressed tight. She leaned in slightly, her voice louder, meant not just for him, but for the rows around. Passengers in economy need to follow directions the first time they're given. Don't make me repeat myself. The man in 27B didn't move. He simply nodded, slid the bag out, and lifted it into the overhead bin above with smooth ease. Not a word more, not a glance of defiance, but the silence after lingered like static. Olivia frowned, pulling one earbud out. Michael Harris exhaled slowly, watching but saying nothing. Daniel Ruiz hesitated in the aisle, shifting from foot to foot, then hurried on as Karen's eyes narrowed in warning. Karen adjusted her scarf, smoothed her hair, and moved to the next row as though nothing had happened. But in that small exchange, the temperature of the cabin had shifted. A ripple of unease moved through the air, subtle but unmistakable. Nathan Carter opened his book again, turning the page slowly. His face gave nothing away, but behind his calm exterior, an old ache stirred. Memories of buses he wasn't welcome on, stores where his mother had been followed like a suspect, the sting of knowing exactly what had just happened and choosing, for now, to remain still. The aircraft doors sealed with a mechanical thud, the kind that told everyone there was no turning back. Passengers shifted, seatbelts clicked into place, and the cabin grew quieter except for the occasional cough or the shuffle of magazines. Nathan Carter sat back in 27B, the paperback still resting in his hands. He hadn't read more than 2 paragraphs. His mind lingered on the tone of the purser's voice, the way she had made a private correction into a public performance. The sting wasn't in the instruction about the bag. It was in the way her words carried an extra layer, an assumption that he would be the one to disobey, that he needed to be reminded of his place. He had lived long enough to recognize the small edges of prejudice. They rarely arrived as a shout. More often, they slipped in disguised as regulations or policy, wrapped in professional authority but sharpened by bias. And he had also lived long enough to know that if he met that edge with anger, it would confirm her story, not his, from across the aisle. Olivia Brooks studied him. She wasn't sure why, but something about the quiet steadiness in his face caught her attention. Most passengers would have grumbled, maybe argued. He had simply complied, in silence, with a dignity that somehow made the purser look smaller. Olivia tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her phone resting on her lap. Instinct told her this wasn't the end. A few rows back, Michael Harris rubbed his temples. He had worn a badge for 20 years, patrolled streets where words could ignite violence in seconds. He knew the tone Karen Mitchell had used. He had heard officers use it, too, in the old days. The tone that didn't just enforce rules, but pressed a weight down on the person in front of you, daring them to push back. His stomach turned with unease, but his voice stayed locked behind clenched teeth, old habits of silence. Meanwhile, Daniel Ruiz hurried down the aisle, collecting stray headphones, checking seatbelts. He kept sneaking glances at Nathan. Daniel had joined Apex Air less than a year ago, still learning procedures, still trying to balance kindness with obedience to senior crew. He wanted to say something, maybe even apologize on behalf of his team, but Karen's shadow loomed large. He had seen what happened to junior attendants who crossed her reassigned schedules, poor evaluations, careers derailed. He swallowed the words and kept moving. The aircraft shuddered as it pushed back from the gate. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, calm and practiced. "Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robert Hayes. We're number 3 for departure. Flight time to Chicago is just under 1 hour and 20 minutes. Sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly." Karen moved with brisk steps, checking rows with a stern eye. When she passed Nathan again, her gaze lingered. He didn't look up, only turned another page in his book. That quiet composure seemed to provoke her more than open defiance. She cleared her throat. "Sir, I'll need you to adjust your seatbelt so it's visible. Regulations are clear on this." Nathan's seatbelt was already fastened, the silver clasp lying flat across his lap. Still, he lifted it higher, placing it on top of his blazer. "Of course," he said softly. The words carried no sarcasm, no heat, just calm acknowledgement. Yet the moment was thick. Olivia felt her chest tighten. Michael clenched his fists. Daniel glanced back, then quickly turned away. The plane began its taxi, engines roaring. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, centering himself. He had been in tougher rooms board meetings where millions of dollars hinged on his calm, negotiations where lives depended on logistics. And yet, somehow, these small indignities cut deeper. They were not about power or money. They were about humanity. He remembered his mother, standing at a grocery counter decades ago. The cashier had counted her change twice, loud enough for everyone in line to hear, then whispered to a colleague, "They always pay in cash, don't they?" He had been 12, old enough to understand the insult, young enough to feel helpless. That helplessness had never left him. Now, sitting in 27B, he told himself, not helpless, not anymore, but patience was its own kind of strength. He would wait. The engines roared louder, pressing everyone back into their seats as the plane lifted from the runway. Lights flickered, trays rattled. Then the cabin steadied as Apex Air Flight 482 climbed into the night sky. The city lights of Riverton twinkled below, fading into darkness. 15 minutes into the flight, service began. Daniel pushed the beverage cart, his movements careful, professional. When he reached Nathan's row, he offered a small smile. "Would you like something to drink?" "Sir." His tone carried a quiet kindness, as if to repair what had been broken. "Water, please." "Thank you," Nathan replied. Before Daniel could pour, Karen appeared, intercepting. She placed a hand firmly on the cart. "I'll handle this row." Her smile was tight, directed not at Nathan, but at the surrounding passengers. "We have to ensure service is done properly." She poured water into a flimsy plastic cup and set it down harder than necessary on Nathan's tray. A drop splashed onto his sleeve. "Here you go. Try not to spill it." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Olivia pressed her phone tighter in her palm, thumb hovering near the record button. Michael looked straight ahead, jaw locked. Daniel stood frozen, a faint flush on his face. Nathan dabbed the water with his napkin, movements unhurried. He lifted the cup, took a slow sip, then set it down again. His voice was measured, deliberate. "Thank you." That was all. But inside, he felt the ache deepen, not for himself. He had learned to endure slights. The ache was for the message it sent to everyone watching for the younger attendant who was learning silence, for the student debating whether to press record, for the bystander reliving old habits of complicity. Each small moment, he knew, carried weight. As Karen pushed the cart onward, Olivia finally tapped her screen. The red circle blinked. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but something inside her said this mattered. She could not explain why, only that the man in 27B deserved more than silence. Nathan turned a page of his book, eyes scanning words he wasn't reading. He felt the shift, somewhere around him. Someone had decided not to look away. And that, he thought, might change everything. The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm, like a low drumbeat under every conversation. The plane had leveled at 34,000 feet, and the seatbelt sign clicked off with a soft chime. A few passengers stood to stretch. Others reached for tablets or magazines. For most, it was just another flight. But in row 27, the air felt heavier. Nathan Carter sat with his hands folded loosely over his book, his gaze calm but far away. He sensed the eyes on him, some sympathetic, some curious, and one pair of eyes, sharp and watchful, belonged to Karen Mitchell. She lingered near the galley, her arms crossed, her expression tight. Something about Nathan unsettled her. He had not raised his voice, not argued, not even sighed, yet the way he carried himself as if her words slid off but did not diminish him felt like defiance. She told herself it was about control, about following procedure. But deep inside, she recognized the same quiet strength that had always made her uneasy. Daniel Ruiz moved the snack basket down the aisle, his heart thumping faster each time he neared row 27. When he offered it to Nathan, he whispered, "Peanuts or pretzels? Serve pretzels." "Thank you," Nathan replied. His tone was warm, steady. Daniel wanted to say something to undo the sting of his colleague's treatment, but Karen's presence loomed like a shadow. He simply smiled and moved on. 2 rows back, Michael Harris leaned forward in his seat. His cop instincts told him the situation was brewing. He could hear the clipped tone in Karen's voice when she spoke to passengers, the stiffness in her posture when she glanced at Nathan. He had spent decades reading tension before it broke, and he hated himself for sitting still. Olivia Brooks adjusted her phone in her lap, pretending to scroll but keeping the camera angled forward. The red recording light pulsed quietly. She told herself she wasn't snooping. She was witnessing, documenting. Her professor once said, "Truth hides in ordinary spaces. Find it there." Something told her the truth in this cabin needed to be caught before it vanished. 15 minutes later, the first real crack came. Karen returned to row 27 with a forced smile. "Sir, I'll need you to change seats. We're making a balance adjustment for safety reasons." Nathan looked up slowly. The cabin was nearly full. The seat she pointed to was farther back, squeezed between 2 strangers, clearly less comfortable. His current seat was fine. He knew enough about aviation to understand balance adjustments weren't made mid-flight. Not like this. His voice was even. "This seat is acceptable. I'll remain here." Karen's smile thinned. "You'll move, if I say so. Regulations are not optional." Her words rang louder than necessary, carrying to surrounding rows. Passengers stiffened, glancing between them. Michael Harris felt heat rise in his chest. He wanted to speak, to say this was wrong. But old habits of watching from the sidelines kept him pinned to his seat, his fists curled tight against his knees. Nathan inhaled slowly. He kept his voice calm, soft enough to make people lean in, respectfully. "Ma'am, I am following all regulations. There is no safety concern here." For a second, the air stilled. Olivia's phone caught the scene, her pulse racing. Daniel froze halfway down the aisle, torn between duty and decency. Karen's composure cracked. Her voice rose, sharp as broken glass. "Passengers in economy need to learn cooperation. If you can't handle instructions, maybe flying isn't for you." A silence dropped over the cabin, heavy and uncomfortable. A child asked their mother what the lady meant. The mother hushed them quickly. Nathan's eyes softened. He thought of his mother again, standing on a bus decades ago, told to move farther back, even though the seat she held was hers by right. He remembered the way she had pressed her lips together, choosing dignity over protest, because survival demanded it. The ache of that memory pressed against his chest. He would not give Karen Mitchell the satisfaction of anger, but he would not yield either. He folded his hands calmly. "I will remain in my seat." Karen's cheeks flushed. She spun on her heel, striding to the intercom. Passengers murmured nervously as her voice rang through the cabin, pitched to be heard by all. "Captain, we may have a disruptive passenger in row 27. Please be aware." Gasps followed. Heads turned toward Nathan, who sat motionless, his face unreadable. Olivia's camera trembled in her grip. Michael's jaw locked, shame pooling in his stomach. Daniel's eyes darted to Nathan, silently apologizing, before he returned to his duties with a lump in his throat. Karen returned, arms folded. "Stay seated. We'll handle this when we land." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Some passengers frowned at Nathan, suspicion planted by Karen's words. Others looked at him with sympathy, seeing the injustice unfold. Nathan reached for his cup of water, lifted it with steady hands, and drank. Each swallow was deliberate, controlled, as if to say, "I am not moved." Yet inside, his heart carried the weight of decades of moments like this, small humiliations disguised as protocol, tiny cuts that bled into a lifetime. He thought of the people watching him now, the student who might find courage, the young attendant who might choose kindness next time, the bystander who might finally speak. He set the cup down, his eyes meeting Olivia's for a brief second. She felt her throat tighten. That look wasn't just about him, it was about all of them. A silent plea. Remember this. Don't let it slip away. The engines droned on, indifferent, but in row 27 silence had become heavy. It was no longer just about a seat or a bag or a cup of water. It was about dignity, and the quiet battle to keep it alive. The cabin never truly goes silent. There is always the hum of engines, the shuffle of shoes, the creak of seats. But now, another sound filled the space murmurs. Quiet, uncertain whispers that traveled from row to row, like ripples spreading across still water. Nathan Carter sat still, hands folded neatly, as if he were part of the aircraft itself. His stillness only magnified the noise around him. Every glance toward row 27 carried weight. Some passengers leaned toward him, offering small nods of solidarity. Others leaned away, caught between discomfort and suspicion, unsure of what to believe. Olivia Brooks lowered her phone for a moment, her heart racing. She could feel the footage on her screen burning like a live coal. She wasn't sure if it would ever see the light of day. But she knew one thing: what she captured was truth. She thought about her journalism. Professor's words. Truth doesn't wait. It demands courage. Michael Harris sat rigid, staring at the seat back in front of him. He had seen confrontations before, plenty of them in his years on the force, but this one felt different. It wasn't about law or order. It was about dignity. And the way Karen Mitchell's words twisted the scene made his gut churn. He wanted to stand up, to use his voice, but something older than habit held him down. The shame of silence pressed on his chest. In the galley, Daniel Ruiz leaned against the counter, his hands trembling slightly. He could hear Karen's voice in his head, sharp and scolding, warning him what would happen if he crossed her. Yet he could also see Nathan's calm eyes, the quiet strength that seemed to say, "Do the right thing." Daniel felt torn in two. Karen Mitchell returned to the aisle, her chin lifted high. She knew eyes were on her, and she fed on that authority. To her, the murmurs only confirmed she was in control. the one holding order against an unruly passenger. In her mind, Nathan Carter was not dignified. He was dangerous, precisely because he would not bend. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice crisp, "we will be landing in less than 2 hours. I ask for your cooperation to ensure safety." Her eyes swept the cabin, pausing deliberately on Nathan. The subtext was clear. He was the problem. A man across the aisle muttered, "Doesn't look disruptive to me." His wife tugged at his sleeve, urging silence. Still, the words lingered, and a few passengers nodded faintly. Nathan caught the man's eye and gave the smallest nod in return. Not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement, a thread of shared humanity in a tense cabin. The beverage cart rattled forward. Daniel pushed it slowly, his hand steadying the metal frame as if it were the only thing anchoring him. When he reached row 27, his voice softened. "Coffee, tea, or water?" "Sir," Nathan looked at him, eyes warm despite the tension. "Water, please." Daniel poured carefully, his hands no longer trembling. As he handed the cup, their eyes met, and Nathan gave a quiet thank you that carried more weight than any speech. Karen's sharp voice cut through. "Daniel, keep moving. Don't waste time." The cart jerked forward again. Daniel swallowed hard, biting back words he longed to say. Meanwhile, Olivia adjusted her phone once more. She whispered to herself, "This isn't just about him. This is about all of us." Michael finally shifted, leaning toward Nathan's seat. His voice was low, hesitant. "You're not alone, sir." Nathan turned slightly, offering a calm nod. "Thank you." Two-word. Simple, but enough to ease Michael's shame for a moment. But the reprieve didn't last. Karen strode back down the aisle, her heels tapping sharply against the floor. She stopped at Nathan's row, her arms crossed. "Sir," she said loudly, "this is your final warning. Any further resistance will result in immediate removal upon landing. Do you understand?" The cabin hushed. Even children stilled at the edge in her tone. Nathan looked up slowly, his voice steady as stone. "I have complied with every rule. I will not be moved by intimidation." Karen's lips tightened. "Passengers like you." She stopped herself, catching the weight of her own words, but the implication hung in the air. Olivia's recording caught everything: her tone, her glare, the careful restraint in Nathan's voice. Michael's jaw clenched. His silence had stretched too long. He leaned forward, his voice firm. "He's not disruptive. He's sitting quietly in his seat. That's all." A murmur of agreement followed from another row. Someone whispered, "She's going too far." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Sir, unless you wish to be included in this report, I suggest you remain quiet." Michael sank back reluctantly. But the damage was done. Karen's authority was no longer absolute. Seeds of doubt had been planted. Nathan breathed deeply. He thought of his staff back at Riverton, international workers who depended on his leadership, his calm in crises. He thought of the community he served, people who walked through his airport every day, trusting the system would treat them fairly. If only they knew how that same system could turn against its own. The weight of responsibility pressed against him, but beneath it, a quiet resolve grew. He would not meet anger with anger. He would not meet humiliation with shame. He would meet it with the only power prejudice could not strip away: dignity. The plane cruised on, but in row 27 the battle continued, not of fists or shouts, but of silence and resolve. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The murmurs grew again, but this time they carried a different tone. Not just discomfort, but recognition. A sense that what they witnessed mattered, that perhaps they would tell the story later I was there when it happened. And through it all, Nathan Carter remained still, his presence quiet but unyielding, as if the weight of decades of injustice rested on his shoulders, and he chose, once again, to carry it with grace. The seatbelt sign dinged softly overhead, but no one paid it much attention. The real tension wasn't from turbulence, it was from the thin line stretched tight between dignity and humiliation, waiting to snap. Karen Mitchell stood near the galley, whispering to another flight attendant, her arms moving sharply as if she were cutting the air with every word. Daniel Ruiz kept his head down, rearranging cups and napkins, pretending not to hear, but he heard every syllable. "He's defiant," Karen hissed. "Passengers like that don't belong here. I'll file the report myself." Daniel wanted to speak. He wanted to say that Nathan Carter had done nothing wrong, that he had followed every rule, but his throat tightened, and fear of losing his job wrapped around him like invisible chains. Back in row 27, Nathan remained composed. His hand rested on the armrest, fingers steady, though inside, a tide of memories pressed against him. He remembered a younger version of himself, told by a teacher that his ambitions were too big for a boy like you. He remembered being stopped at a department store, accused of theft because he wore a nice jacket. Each humiliation had left a scar. Yet here he was, decades later, the director of one of the busiest airports in the country, still forced to sit under suspicion. Olivia Brooks noticed the way Karen glanced back at Nathan, her eyes hard, her mouth pursed. Olivia lifted her phone again, recording quietly. The red light blinked faintly, capturing evidence, capturing history. Michael Harris sat with his arms folded, his conscience heavy. He had worn a badge once, sworn to protect. But he knew he had failed in moments just like this. Silence had always been easier. Now, in this cabin, he felt the weight of every silence pressing down. When Karen returned to row 27, her steps were deliberate, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Sir, stand up," she commanded. Nathan looked up calmly. "And for what reason?" "Ma'am." "For refusing instructions, for causing disruption. You'll be reassigned to another seat at the back, closer to crew supervision." Ag-gaffs flickered across the cabin. A woman in row 28 whispered, "That's not right." A man in row 30 muttered, "He hasn't done anything." Nathan's voice was measured. "I paid for this seat. I have caused no disruption. I will remain here." Karen's cheeks flushed, anger burning beneath her skin. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You think your calm face fools me? I know your type, always pretending to be better than the rules." Nathan met her gaze, his voice steady but firm. "The rules, ma'am, apply equally to every passenger, including me." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Passengers held their breath. Olivia's camera caught every second, every word, every flicker of emotion. Karen straightened abruptly and raised her voice for all to hear. "Captain Hayes will be notified. If you do not comply, security will meet us upon landing." The cabin stirred like a hive. Whispers buzzing. Disbelief spreading? Michael finally rose halfway from his seat, his voice rough but strong. "Enough. He hasn't broken a rule. We all see it. You're targeting him, and it's wrong." Karen turned sharply. "Sit down, sir. This does not concern you." But Michael didn't sit. His shoulders squared, his voice steadied. "It concerns everyone when one person's dignity is stripped away. It concerns me." A murmur of agreement rippled through the rows. Passengers shifted, some nodding, others whispering support. The balance of power tilted, not entirely, but enough to rattle Karen's confidence. Her eyes flashed, but she forced a brittle smile. Very well. We'll let the captain decide. She spun on her heel, striding toward the cockpit. The cabin buzzed with restless energy. Daniel Ruiz hesitated, then slowly approached Nathan with a bottle of water. He set it on Nathan's tray table, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, sir. I know you haven't done anything wrong." Nathan looked at him, his expression softening. "Thank you, son. Sometimes saying what you know is right is the bravest thing." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I'll try." Before more could be said, Karen's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. The captain will address this matter shortly." A hush fell. Everyone knew something had escalated. Minutes later, Captain Robert Hayes emerged from the cockpit, his cap in hand. His expression was measured, but his eyes betrayed unease. He walked down the aisle, stopping at row 27. "Sir," he said to Nathan, "I understand there's been a dispute." Nathan met his gaze calmly. "Captain, I have complied with all rules. I've been asked to move without cause. I've been threatened with removal. I remain seated in the seat I paid for." Hayes shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Karen, who stood nearby, arms folded like a sentry. Karen spoke quickly. "He's been defiant, Captain. He's challenged crew authority. For safety reasons, I recommended relocation." Hayes looked between them, the weight of decision heavy in his eyes. The murmurs of the passengers grew louder, a chorus pressing on him. He wasn't just addressing a man in 27B, he was addressing the entire cabin. Before he could speak, Olivia's voice broke through, clear and strong. "I have it all on video. Captain, every word. He's been nothing but respectful. She's the one escalating." All eyes turned. Olivia's phone hovered in her hand, its screen glowing like a beacon. Karen's face went pale, then flushed. "You have no right. But the damage was done." The cabin erupted with whispers, voices rising in defense of Nathan. Michael spoke firmly, louder this time. "She's wrong. Captain, we all saw it." The weight shifted fully now. Karen's authority crumbled beneath the gaze of dozens of witnesses. Captain Hayes raised a hand, quieting the cabin. His voice was calm but resolute. "Thank you. I'll review this matter carefully. For now, everyone remain seated." He met Nathan's eyes briefly, a flicker of respect passing between them. Nathan inclined his head. "That's all I ask. Captain, fairness." As Hayes returned to the cockpit, the cabin remained charged, the air thick with something more than tension, something closer to awakening. For the first time, many passengers realized they were part of something larger than a dispute. They were witnesses to truth, to injustice, and perhaps to justice fighting to breathe. Nathan leaned back slightly, closing his eyes. Inside, his thoughts stirred. He wondered how many more times he would face battles like this. Battles not of his choosing, but beneath the weariness, a resolve deepened. He would not falter, not here, not now, and somewhere down the aisle. Olivia whispered into her phone's mic, as if narrating history in real time. "The world needs to see this." The captain's announcement crackled over the intercom, his voice steady but edged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into Chicago. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The routine words carried unusual weight. Everyone in the cabin knew that what happened after landing might not be routine at all. Nathan Carter adjusted his belt quietly, his face calm, though a storm of thoughts swirled beneath the surface. He had been here before, different settings, different uniforms, but always the same dynamic. Power misused, dignity tested, and always the choice to rise in anger or to remain anchored in quiet strength. Karen Mitchell paced the aisle like a soldier preparing for battle. She spoke in clipped phrases to nearby passengers. "Thank you for your patience. Safety is our priority. Please remember, crew authority must be respected." Her eyes darted toward row 27, ensuring her narrative was clear. The man in 27B was the problem. But the problem for Karen was that fewer people believed her. Olivia Brooks kept her phone steady, her finger hovering near the screen as she whispered into the microphone, narrating softly for her own record. "We're descending now. The tension is unbearable. Everyone sees it. He's calm. She's relentless." Michael Harris shifted in his seat, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. He thought of the oath he once took as a police officer to protect and serve without bias. He remembered the times he had failed to step in, the lives marked by silence. Not this time, he told himself. Not again. Daniel Ruiz stood frozen near the galley, his chest rising and falling quickly. His training manuals never covered moments like this when doing the right thing felt like stepping off a cliff. He stole glances at Nathan, who sat with quiet dignity, and he felt something shift inside him. Maybe courage wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe it was acting in spite of it. The plane shuddered gently in turbulence, a ripple that made passengers clutch armrests. The momentary distraction only heightened the sense of descent, not just toward Chicago, but toward confrontation. Karen stopped abruptly beside Nathan's row. She leaned in, her voice low, but her words sharp as glass. "You've embarrassed me in front of this cabin. Don't think for a second this ends when we land." Nathan turned his head slowly, meeting her eyes with calm intensity. "This is not about embarrassment, ma'am. It's about respect." Her nostrils flared. "Respect is earned, and you've shown none." Nathan's reply was quiet, but carried across the row. Respect is given freely, or is not respect at all. Several passengers nearby inhaled sharply. Olivia caught it on camera, her heart pounding as she realized the exchange was more than personal, it was universal. The turbulence grew stronger, trays rattling, overhead bins creaking. Karen steadied herself on a seat back, her eyes never leaving Nathan. For a fleeting second, uncertainty flickered across her face, as if she realized she was losing the audience around her. The fastened seatbelt light glowed. A flight attendant's voice echoed from the front, reminding passengers to remain seated. But in the back rows, whispers churned, words like unfair, wrong, and racist floated just loud enough to reach Karen's ears. Her jaw tightened. She raised her voice deliberately, so the cabin could hear. "This passenger has refused to comply with crew instructions. Security will meet us at the gate." The effect was immediate. Gasps, mutters, even a child's small voice asking his mother. "Why are they taking him?" Michael Harris couldn't contain himself. He rose halfway again, ignoring the turbulence warning. "Captain Hayes knows the truth. We all do. He's been sitting quietly this whole flight. If anyone deserves questioning, it's not him." Karen's eyes blazed. "Sit down before you make this worse for yourself." Michael didn't move. His voice hardened, louder. "Worse for me, or worse for you when this video gets out?" He pointed toward Olivia, who lifted her phone slightly, the screen glowing in defiance. A ripple of energy surged through the cabin. For the first time, Karen looked genuinely rattled. Daniel Ruiz took a step forward, his voice shaky but audible. "Ms. Mitchell, maybe we should de-escalate. He hasn't done anything wrong." Karen spun on him, fury sharp in her whisper. "Do you want a career here, Daniel? Then stay out of this." Daniel swallowed hard, but his voice didn't break. "I want a career built on truth, not lies." The cabin erupted with murmurs, some clapping faintly, others whispering encouragement. For Karen, the ground was slipping. For Nathan, the ground felt steadier. Nathan's voice finally cut through, deep and calm, commanding attention without force. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your support, but please remain seated. We will land safely. Let the truth speak for itself." His words settled over the cabin like a blanket, calming the restless energy. Even Michael, still standing, eased back into his seat, though his eyes stayed fixed on Karen. Karen's face was pale now, her authority fractured, yet her pride refused surrender. She retreated toward the front, clutching her notepad as though it were armor. The plane began its final approach, engines roaring louder, city lights twinkling far below. Passengers leaned into their windows, but their attention kept drifting back to row 27. They all knew they were witnessing something they would tell again and again, a story that would not stay inside this cabin. Olivia whispered into her phone, "We're almost on the ground, but the real landing hasn't even started." Nathan closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. He knew what awaited beyond the gate confrontation. Exposure, perhaps humiliation turned into vindication. He thought of the thousands who passed through Riverton International every day, trusting the system he led. He thought of his father's words from long ago. "Stand tall, son. Even when the world tries to shrink you." The wheels thumped against the runway. The cabin jolted. An applause broke out half-heartedly, an instinctive reaction, though few felt celebratory. As the plane slowed, the tension grew heavier, not lighter. The passengers knew the next chapter was moments away. Karen adjusted her uniform, her lips pressed into a thin line. She whispered under her breath, almost too low to hear, "You'll regret this." Nathan opened his eyes, his voice quiet but resolute. "No. The truth leaves no regrets." The aircraft taxied toward the gate, lights glowing across the tarmac. Every heart in the cabin seemed to beat faster, waiting for the storm that would break once the doors opened. And in row 27, Nathan Carter sat tall, silent but unshaken, like a man who had carried storms his entire life and knew how to walk through them with dignity. The plane rolled slowly along the tarmac, the hum of the engines lowering to a growl as it neared gate D12. The lights outside painted the cabin in alternating shadows and silver streaks. Passengers shifted, gathering their belongings, but the tension in the air was thicker than the recycled oxygen they breathed. Karen Mitchell stood at the front, arms crossed, lips thin with determination, into her intercom phone. Her words carried a steel edge. "We'll need airport security at the jet bridge. Passenger in 27B, non-compliant, possible threat." Her voice was low enough that only the crew near the galley could hear the exact words, but the passengers knew what she had done. A ripple of murmurs swept through the cabin. Michael Harris muttered, half to himself, but loud enough for others nearby, "Threat. He's the calmest man on this plane." Olivia Brooks clutched her phone tighter, her camera still rolling. Her heart pounded, but she felt a deep certainty this footage would matter. It wasn't just about clicks or views. It was about truth. Daniel Ruiz stood frozen in the galley, the pit of his stomach heavy. He had never seen a purser abuse authority so blatantly. He whispered to himself, "What have we done?" The wheels locked as the plane braked sharply. A sigh of relief moved through the cabin as the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago O'Hare. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is off." It was a familiar announcement, but everyone knew nothing about this arrival was familiar. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Immediately. Heads turned toward row 27. Nathan Carter remained seated, his hands folded neatly on his lap, calm, still, as if carved from something unshakable. Karen marched down the aisle, her steps sharp, heels clacking against the floor. She stopped in front of Nathan, her voice cold, but clear enough for all to hear. "Sir, security is waiting outside. You'll leave the plane first. Cooperate, or things will get worse." Nathan looked up slowly, his deep voice even. "I have cooperated in every way. What you've done here is humiliation, not enforcement." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You think you can lecture me? You'll answer to the airport authorities now." Her words backfired instantly. Passengers stirred, mutters rising into protest. "He is the authority," a woman whispered fiercely to her husband. "He didn't do anything," another voice rose from the back. Michael Harris pushed himself to his feet. This time, he didn't hesitate. "Enough, you've lied. You've threatened him. And you've put every one of us in the middle of your power trip. If security's coming, they need to hear from all of us." Clapping started, light at first, then growing. A wave of agreement swept through the rows. Karen's face blanched, but she stood her ground. The cabin door opened with a hiss. Bright fluorescent lights spilled in from the jet bridge. 2 uniformed security officers stepped inside, followed closely by Laura Chen, the Apex Air Station manager. Laura's expression was firm, her clipboard clutched to her chest. Karen straightened as if relief had arrived. She gestured toward Nathan. "That's him. Passenger 27B, non-compliant, disruptive, refused orders." The officers looked at Nathan. He remained seated, posture calm, his eyes steady. The entire cabin held its breath. Then Olivia's voice cut through the silence. "Wait, I recorded everything. He's been nothing but respectful." "She's lying." She held up her phone, the screen glowing, the video already playing at a low volume. Karen's sharp words. "Nathan's calm replies it was all there," Michael added. "I'll testify. Every passenger here knows the truth." Daniel Rui stepped forward, trembling but determined. His voice shook, but his words were clear. She targeted him. He followed every rule. If anyone was disruptive, it wasn't him. The officers exchanged glances. Laura Chen frowned, her gaze narrowing on Karen. "Is this true?" she asked Daniel directly. Daniel nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Yes. It's all on video." A murmur of solidarity spread through the cabin, passengers nodding, whispering agreement. The tide had turned fully. Laura inhaled sharply, then exhaled, her eyes now on Nathan. "Sir, may I have your name?" For the first time. Nathan unfolded slowly from his seat. He stood tall in the narrow aisle, his presence commanding without a word. He looked directly at Laura, his voice resonant, carrying across the cabin. "My name is Nathaniel Carter. I am the executive director of Riverton International Airport." The words dropped like a stone into still water, sending shockwaves through every corner of the plane. Gas filled the air. Olivia's phone shook in her hand. Michael's mouth fell open. Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. Karen stumbled back a half step, her face draining of color. You can't be." Nathan's gaze was unwavering. I oversee operations for millions of passengers every year. I am responsible for ensuring fairness, safety, and dignity in air travel. And tonight, in this cabin, I experienced the very opposite. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the engine seemed muted, as if the plane itself were listening. Laura Chen's face flushed, her posture stiffening. She turned sharply toward Karen. "Step aside." "Now," Karen stammered. I was following procedure." "Procedure," Nathan's voice cut in, calm but piercing. "Procedure does not include prejudice. Procedure does not strip passengers of their dignity." Passengers erupted in applause, some clapping, others voicing their support. The cabin became a courtroom, and the verdict was unanimous. Laura raised her hand for quiet, then addressed Nathan directly. "On behalf of Apex Air, I sincerely apologize. We will launch a full investigation immediately, and we thank you for your patience and for your dignity in the face of this treatment." Nathan inclined his head slightly, his expression steady. Apologies must be more than words. They must be followed by change. The officer stepped back, no longer seeing a disruptive passenger, but a leader standing in his own right. Karen stood frozen, her authority shattered, her career teetering on the edge. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Nathan looked at her one last time, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Every passenger deserves dignity. You forgot that. Remember it now." The applause swelled again, louder this time, a wave of catharsis that washed through the cabin. Olivia whispered into her phone. "The twist. No one saw it coming. He's the director. The one they thought was powerless is the one with the most power." And as Nathan Carter stepped toward the front, escorted not by force, but by respect, the cabin of Apex Air 482 felt transformed. The humiliation had turned to revelation. The story was no longer about one man's quiet strength. It was about everyone who had seen and chosen to believe the truth. The cabin door swung open with a metallic click, releasing the cabin into the fluorescent light of the jet bridge. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel, the echo of footsteps and muffled voices from the terminal drifting inside. But within Apex Air 482 no one moved. Passengers lingered in their seats, eyes fixed on row 27 and the man who had just reshaped the entire narrative. Nathan Carter stood tall in the narrow aisle, his frame steady, his voice still carrying the same quiet weight. For a moment, he seemed less like a passenger and more like a symbol of patience, of resistance, of dignity under fire. Laura Chen stepped closer, clipboard against her chest like a shield. She bowed her head slightly, her voice formal but edged with genuine remorse. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of Apex Air and this crew, I want to apologize. We failed you tonight." Nathan studied her for a long moment, his gaze calm but piercing. Apologies matter when they lead to change. If this ends as words only, the next passenger will endure the same treatment. Laura swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand, and I will make sure this is addressed." Behind her, the two security officers shifted awkwardly. They had arrived expecting confrontation, but instead found themselves witnesses to revelation. They exchanged glances, then quietly stepped aside, letting the gravity of the moment unfold without their interference. Karen Mitchell, however, did not move aside. She hovered near the galley, her shoulders rigid, her face pale, but her lips trembling with denial. "He tricked us," she sputtered. "He didn't say who he was. He wanted this, to embarrass me." The words hung in the air, brittle, breaking apart under the weight of disbelief. Michael Harris barked a short, humorless laugh. "Embarrass you, lady? You did that all by yourself." Several passengers murmured in agreement. A woman in row 32 shook her head. "We all saw what happened. Don't blame him for your choices." Karen's eyes darted from face to face, looking for support and finding none. Her authority, once absolute, had evaporated like mist under the harsh lights of truth. Daniel Ruiz, standing just behind her, spoke quietly but firmly. "Miss Mitchell, it's over. Everyone saw. Everyone knows." Karen turned on him sharply, her voice cracking. "You think you're better than me? You think siding with him saves you?" Daniel flinched, but held his ground. "No, I just think telling the truth is the only thing that matters now." Her face crumpled, a mix of rage and despair. She sank against the galley wall, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her notepad like a lifeline. But the pages that once carried authority now looked meaningless, just paper in shaking hands. Olivia Brooks, her phone still raised, captured the moment. Her voice whispered, almost like narration. "This is what happens when prejudice meets accountability. The mask falls." Nathan took a single step forward, his eyes softening, not with forgiveness yet, but with something deeper. "Karen," he said quietly, and for the first time he used her name. Authority is a gift. It should never be used to strip others of their dignity. Karen looked at him, eyes wide, but said nothing. The passengers began to move at last, retrieving bags from overhead bins. But unlike most flights, no one rushed. They moved slowly, deliberately, many pausing to glance back at Nathan, some nodding, some offering small words of thanks or encouragement. The cabin had become more than a vessel for travel. It had become a courtroom, a classroom, a stage where truth had been witnessed. Michael stopped at Nathan's row before stepping into the aisle. He extended a hand. "Thank you for standing tall when most of us didn't know how." Nathan clasped his hand firmly. "We all stood together tonight. That's how change begins." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "Maybe so, but it started with you." Olivia lingered too. Her phone lowered now, her eyes bright with a mixture of awe and resolve. "Sir," she said softly, "I'll share this. People need to see it. They need to know." Nathan regarded her with quiet respect. "If you share it, do so with care. Make it about truth, not spectacle." Olivia nodded, her jaw set. Truth, nothing less. Daniel was the last to remain. His hands shook, but his voice held. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what happens to me after this, but I couldn't stay silent." Nathan placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Courage is never wasted. Son, whatever comes, remember this moment. You chose truth." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes damp. "Thank you." Laura Chung cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Carter, would you accompany me off the plane? I believe corporate will want to address this immediately." Nathan inclined his head. "Of course." As he walked forward, every eye in the cabin followed. Karen slumped against the galley, shrinking in on herself as Nathan passed. He did not gloat, did not sneer, did not even glance at her with contempt. He simply walked with the same quiet dignity he had carried all night. And in that, he revealed the stark difference between authority abused and authority rightly held. The jet bridge felt cooler, the air sharp after the heavy tension inside the cabin. Outside, terminal lights gleamed against polished floors. The murmur of late-night travelers blended with distant announcements. For most, it was an ordinary night at O'Hare. For those stepping off Flight 482, it was anything but. Nathan paused just inside the terminal, allowing Laura to step beside him. Passengers flowed out behind them, many giving Nathan respectful nods as they passed. A few even clapped softly, not for spectacle, but for gratitude. Laura spoke quietly, almost reverently. "Mr. Carter, this will go straight to corporate. There will be consequences." Nathan's reply was calm. Consequences matter, but change matters more. And as the last passengers exited, leaving behind the hum of the jet bridge, Karen Mitchell still stood frozen in the galley, her career unraveling in silence. The terminal was quieter than usual for a late arrival. The last clusters of travelers shuffled toward baggage claim, their voices low, their footsteps echoing against polished tile. For most, the night was ordinary, but for those who had stepped off Apex Air 482, every sound seemed sharper, every detail etched in memory. Nathan Carter walked with steady steps, Laura Chen beside him. He looked composed, almost serene, yet his presence carried the weight of something unshakable. The passengers who lingered at a distance watched him, whispering among themselves, some filming discreetly, others just staring. Laura guided him toward a glass-walled office overlooking the concourse. Inside, lights glowed harshly against stainless steel fixtures. A long conference table sat at the center, papers scattered across it as if a meeting had been interrupted and abandoned. Tonight, it would host something far less routine. "Please," Laura said, gesturing toward a chair at the head of the table. "Sit here." Nathan shook his head gently. "I'll stand. I've spent the last 3 hours sitting, being told where I could and couldn't belong. Standing feels right." Laura hesitated, then nodded. She knew better than to press. Within minutes, others entered. First came Robert Hayes, the captain, his uniform jacket buttoned tight, jaw set. He carried himself like a man bracing for judgment. Behind him walked Daniel Ruiz, nervous but resolute. And finally, Karen Mitchell, flanked by 2 supervisors from crew management. Her face was pale, streaked with exhaustion and fear. Laura cleared her throat. "We are convening an immediate review of what occurred aboard Apex Air 482. Mr. Nathan Carter, Executive Director of Riverton International Airport, was subjected to treatment that is inconsistent with our policies, our values, and basic human dignity." The words landed like thunder. Karen winced, her shoulders curling inward. Robert Hayes' lips tightened. Nathan spoke, his voice calm, yet carrying across the room. "Titles don't shield a person from prejudice. Tonight, I was treated not as a director, not even as a customer, but as a nuisance, a problem to be managed." He let the silence linger. "I endured it, but many do not have the option, the platform, or the evidence to fight back. That is what concerns me most." Daniel Roy stepped forward slightly. His hands trembled, but his voice held. "It's true. I saw it happen. Mr. Carter was respectful. He never raised his voice. The disrespect was not about his behavior. It was about who he is." Karen's head snapped up, her voice breaking. "That's not fair. You don't understand the pressure we're under, the rules, the constant scrutiny." Nathan turned toward her, his gaze steady but not cruel. "Pressure doesn't excuse prejudice. Rules don't demand humiliation. And scrutiny should never be feared by those who act with integrity." Karen's breath quickened. She clutched her notepad like a shield. I made a mistake, but I didn't mean." Her voice faltered. "I didn't mean to." Laura cut in firmly. "Intent does not erase impact. Passengers recorded everything. Corporate will review it. The evidence is clear." Robert Hayes finally spoke, His voice was low, weary. "Mr. Carter, I take responsibility too. As captain, I failed to intervene. I thought I was keeping the peace by backing my crew. But silence is not neutrality. It was complicity." Nathan's eyes softened slightly. "Acknowledgement matters, Captain, but change matters more." The room fell into heavy silence. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed intrusive. Laura stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, Apex Air's CEO will want to speak with you directly. For now, I can assure you immediate measures will be taken. Ms. Mitchell is relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending full investigation." Karen's knees buckled. She dropped into a chair, staring at her hands. Her voice cracked. "So that's it. My career. Over." After 20 years, Nathan regarded her quietly. "Your choices, not your years, define tonight. Careers are not destroyed by accountability. They are destroyed by refusal to change." Karen covered her face, her body shaking with a mix of anger and despair. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his voice quiet. "Mr. Carter, I'll probably face consequences too, but I couldn't stay silent." Nathan placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and warm. "You spoke the truth. That is never wasted. Whatever comes, remember this moment. Courage lives longer than fear." Laura glanced at Nathan, her voice low but determined. "Mr. Carter, what would you like us to do now?" Nathan paused, weighing his words. Then he spoke, each syllable deliberate. "I want to ensure this never happens again. Not to me, not to anyone. That means real reform, not just apologies. Training, oversight, transparency. If Apex Air is willing, I'll work with you. If not, I'll make sure the world knows." Robert Hayes exhaled slowly. "He's right. This is bigger than one flight." Laura nodded firmly. "Then it begins tonight." Outside the glass walls, the terminal continued its ordinary rhythm, late-night travelers dragging suitcases, janitors mopping floors, announcements echoing. But inside the office, something larger was unfolding. A reckoning. Karen remained silent, her hands gripping her notepad as if it could still anchor her. But even she knew the ground had shifted, and nothing would return to what it was before. Nathan looked around the room once more. Dignity is not optional. It is not negotiable. And it must never depend on the color of one's skin. Remember that. The words settled over everyone like a weight and a promise. And with that, the meeting ended not with shouting, but with a clarity that cut sharper than any anger could. The office lights were beginning to dim across Riverton International Airport as the clock edged toward midnight. Cleaning crews moved silently through the terminal, their mops leaving faint streaks on the polished floors. For most, the day was ending. For Nathan Carter, it was only entering its decisive chapter. Laura Chen checked her phone, then looked up at Nathan with quiet urgency. "Mr. Carter, the CEO of Apex Air is on the line. He insists on speaking with you directly." Nathan gave a small nod. He didn't rush, didn't straighten his tie or adjust his stance. He simply folded his hands in front of him and waited. "Put him through." Laura tapped the conference phone. A deep voice came through, crisp and deliberate. "Mr. Carter, this is Thomas Reynolds, CEO of Apex Air. I wish we were speaking under better circumstances." Nathan's gaze didn't shift from the glass wall that looked out onto the sleeping concourse. "So do I, Mr. Reynolds. Unfortunately, circumstances are shaped by choices, and what happened tonight was no accident." A pause stretched across the line. Then Reynolds said, "I've reviewed the preliminary reports. The recordings are already circulating online. This will be public by morning. I need to understand exactly what happened from your perspective." Nathan inhaled slowly. "Your purser humiliated me, questioned my right to sit in the seat I paid for, and attempted to remove me without cause. Your captain chose silence until passengers intervened. I was treated as though my presence itself was a problem. Do you want more details, or will that suffice?" Reynolds exhaled audibly. "That's more than enough. It's unacceptable. I'll be clear, I intend to remove the individuals involved. But I know you're not looking for scapegoats. You're looking for systemic change." Nathan finally turned toward Laura, then back to the speakerphone. His voice carried weight, steady but edged with something deeper. "Correct. Firing staff without addressing the culture that shaped their actions is nothing more than theater. If you want my cooperation, if you want to salvage Apex Air's reputation, you need to commit to real reform." Reynolds was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you propose?" Nathan stepped closer to the table, resting both hands on its surface. "Mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, from flight attendants to executives, an independent oversight body for passenger complaints, one with teeth, not a PR smokescreen, real consequences tied to measurable outcomes, and transparency. Passengers must know their dignity isn't negotiable." Reynolds' tone hardened slightly. "Those are significant demands. Implementing all of that will take time, money, and leverage with the board. You know how these things work." Nathan's expression didn't change. "I know exactly how they work. Which is why I'm not asking. I'm telling you what's necessary. Because if Apex Air doesn't lead, the public will force you to follow. The recordings already guarantee that." Laura looked down, hiding a faint smile at Nathan's unflinching resolve. Reynolds cleared his throat. "You speak like someone who's negotiated reform before." Nathan allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "That's because I have. Airports deal with systemic bias every day. Tonight, it just happened to be on your aircraft." Reynolds chuckled dryly, though there was no humor in it. "You're a hard man to argue with." "I'm not here to argue," Nathan replied. "I'm here to ensure that no passenger endures what I endured. Whether they're an airport director or a student flying home for the holidays, dignity is not optional." The words hung in the air. "On the other end," Reynolds seemed to weigh them carefully. "Finally?" He spoke, his voice lower, almost resigned. "You've left me little choice. I'll call an emergency board meeting at 8 a.m. We'll draft a response, not just for optics but for structure. If you're willing, I'd like you to be part of that process." Nathan leaned back slightly, his hands folding behind his back. "I'll attend, but understand my presence is not to shield you. It's to hold you accountable." Reynolds sighed. "Fair enough. Then I'll see you in the morning." The line went dead. Silence filled the office once more. Laura finally broke it, her voice soft but certain. That was more than a conversation. That was the start of something bigger. Nathan nodded slowly. Bigger than one flight. Bigger than one company. This is about who gets to feel like they belong when they step onto an airplane, and who doesn't. Daniel Ruiz, who had been lingering near the doorway, swallowed hard. "Do you think they'll actually change?" Nathan looked at him, his eyes steady but kind. Change never starts with willingness. It starts with pressure. Tonight gave us both. Robert Hayes shifted uncomfortably, guilt still heavy in his posture. "Mr. Carter, if there's any way I can make amends, I'll do it." Nathan regarded him for a moment. "Start by remembering that silence is not neutral. The next time you see wrong, speak. That will be worth more than any apology." The captain nodded, his shoulders squaring slightly as if carrying a new weight. Laura gathered her notes, her professional calm unbroken. "We'll prepare for tomorrow's board meeting. Mr. Carter, if you'd like, we can arrange a car to take you home." Nathan shook his head. "I'll walk. I need the air." He stepped out of the office and into the terminal. The space stretched wide and empty, a cathedral of glass and steel. The echoes of the day's humiliation still lingered, but so too did the promise of something more: accountability, reform, and maybe even healing. As Nathan walked past the rows of empty check-in counters, he thought of the countless faces that had stood where he now stood. Travelers of every race, class, and background. People who wanted nothing more than to move from one place to another with dignity intact. Tonight had reminded him just how fragile that dignity could be, and how fiercely it needed to be protected. The glass towers of Apex Air's headquarters in downtown Chicago gleamed in the early morning sun. From the outside, everything appeared calm, just another weekday beginning in the city. Inside, however, the mood was anything but ordinary. The company's top executives had been summoned before dawn for an emergency meeting. Nathan Carter arrived without entourage, dressed in the same navy suit he had worn the night before. There was no press, no cameras, only the muted tension of a corporation staring down a storm of its own making. Laura Chen walked beside him, her file tucked under her arm, her expression composed but resolute. They were escorted into the top-floor boardroom, a cavernous space with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. Around the long mahogany table sat the directors of Apex Air men and women in tailored suits, their faces tight with fatigue and worry. At the head sat Thomas Reynolds, the CEO, his usually commanding posture subdued. "Mr. Carter," Reynolds said, rising to greet him. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Nathan gave a single nod. "Circumstances demand it." Reynolds gestured for him to take a seat. But again, Nathan remained standing. He placed both hands on the back of a chair and looked around the room. "Before we begin, I want to be clear. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for accountability." A murmur moved through the directors. Some avoided his gaze. Others studied him with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. Reynolds cleared his throat. "The incident aboard Flight 482 has already begun to spread online. By this afternoon, it will be a national headline. We can't stop that. What we can do is decide how we respond. And Mr. Carter has agreed to advise us." One director, a sharp-faced man named Alan Whitaker, leaned forward. "With all respect, why should we hand our corporate response over to someone outside the company? This was an unfortunate incident, but internal HR can manage it." Nathan met his eyes without flinching. "Because HR didn't sit in seat 27B last night, Mr. Whitaker. I did. And because your unfortunate incident is a symptom of something larger. If you think this is about one purser's poor judgment, then you're not paying attention." The room fell quiet. Even Reynolds seemed unsettled by Nathan's steady voice. Another director, Evelyn Shaw, spoke up. "Mr. Carter, what exactly are you suggesting? That Apex Air is systemically discriminatory?" Nathan let the question hang for a moment before answering. "I'm suggesting that when an airline allows bias to go unchecked, when silence becomes policy, it doesn't matter what your slogans say. Passengers know the truth. And now, thanks to the videos, so will the world." Laura Chen opened her file, sliding copies of passenger statements across the table. Olivia Brooks's video transcript, Michael Harris's written account, Daniel Ruiz's testimony. Each document painted the same picture: a culture of deference to authority, even when that authority was weaponized against a paying passenger because of his race. Reynolds clasped his hands tightly, his knuckles pale. "So what do we do?" Nathan straightened. "You already know what to do. Commit to mandatory anti-bias training, establish independent oversight, tie executive compensation to measurable progress in customer dignity metrics, and above all, be transparent. Tell the public the truth, even if it stings." Whitaker shook his head. "That's excessive. Shareholders won't tolerate it. We're running an airline, not a social experiment." Nathan's voice hardened, though it never rose. "You're not running an airline. You're running a promise that every passenger who boards your planes will arrive safely and with dignity intact. Break that promise, and you lose not just customers, but legitimacy. And let me remind you, shareholders care most about trust. Lose that, and you'll lose them too." For a moment, no one spoke. The truth of his words weighed heavier than any rebuke could. Evelyn Shaw leaned back, thoughtful now. "If we don't act decisively, the government will. The DOT and FAA will have a field day with this." Reynolds exhaled, his shoulders dropping. "She's right. We don't have the luxury of inaction." He turned to Nathan. "Would you be willing to partner with us, Mr. Carter, not just as an advisor for today, but as an external voice to guide these reforms?" Nathan considered this carefully. "I'll partner, but on my terms. No token gestures, no half measures. If you commit, it must be real, or I'll walk away and let the public, the regulators, and the courts handle it." The directors shifted uncomfortably, but none challenged him this time. Whitaker finally muttered, "And what if we agree, and the public still doesn't forgive us?" Nathan's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "Forgiveness is not your goal. Integrity is. Earn that, and trust will follow." The silence that followed was different now, not defensive, but contemplative. Reynolds broke it. "Then it's settled. We'll issue a public statement within the hour, effective immediately. Karen Mitchell is terminated. Captain Hayes will be reassigned pending further review. Training modules will be drafted by the end of the week, and we'll engage independent auditors." He turned back to Nathan. "And we'll need you at the press conference this afternoon. People will listen to you more than they'll listen to us." Nathan paused, then nodded once. "I'll be there, but not for your image, for the passengers who deserve better." Reynolds accepted this quietly, almost gratefully, understood. As the meeting adjourned, the directors filed out one by one, their faces etched with the knowledge that their world had shifted overnight. Laura stayed behind, gathering her papers. "You spoke the truth," she said softly to Nathan, "and you made them hear it." Nathan looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the expanse of the city below. Hearing is only the first step. Now we see if they act. The boardroom emptied, leaving Nathan standing alone in the morning light, his reflection blending with the skyline. The battle was far from over, but a line had been drawn, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of justice beginning to tip. The media vans lined up outside Apex Air's headquarters before noon. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras pointed toward the glass doors of the main lobby. Overnight, the story had spread from social media to national news. Every outlet wanted a statement. Every headline screamed some version of the same truth. Apex Air humiliated a black passenger, not knowing he was the airport director. Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric and tense. Staff whispered in hallways, Executives scurried with papers in hand, and the press room filled with the hum of voices and the click of camera shutters. Rows of chairs had been arranged before a long table draped in navy cloth, the Apex Air logo shining behind it. Nathan Carter stood off to the side, calm as ever, his presence radiating steadiness. Laura Chen stood beside him, offering quiet, logistical updates. Thomas Reynolds adjusted his tie at the table, his face pale under the bright lights. A communications director stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. We will begin shortly. Please hold your questions until after the opening remarks." The chatter dimmed. Lights brightened. Cameras zoomed. Reynolds began. "Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Reynolds, CEO of Apex Air. Last night, on Flight 482, a member of our crew engaged in behavior that was unacceptable, discriminatory, and deeply harmful. This was not only a violation of company policy, but a violation of basic human decency." He paused, his voice heavy with rehearsed contrition. "Effective immediately, the individuals responsible have been removed from duty. But accountability does not stop with individuals. It must extend to systems. That is why, starting today, Apex Air will undergo a company-wide transformation to ensure dignity and equality for every passenger." The cameras flashed wildly. Reporters scribbled notes. Reynolds continued, "We are honored to have with us today a man whose leadership and integrity have already guided us toward this commitment, Mr. Nathan Carter, Executive Director of Riverton International Airport and passenger on Flight 482. Mr. Carter has agreed to share his perspective." He stepped back. Nathan moved forward, every eye in the room fixed on him. Nathan didn't read from notes. He didn't need to. His voice carried, calm yet resolute. "Last night, I boarded a plane as a paying customer. I sat in seat 27B, hoping only to arrive safely, like everyone else. Instead, I was met with humiliation. I was told, in word and in tone, that I did not belong. And when I tried to maintain my dignity quietly, I was treated as a disruption." The room was silent except for the clicks of cameras. Nathan's gaze swept the reporters, as though speaking not just to them, but through them to everyone watching at home. "I endured that treatment not because of anything I did, but because of who I am, a black man. And though I carry the title of airport director in that cabin, I was stripped to something far more ordinary, a passenger fighting for dignity. And I know many who look like me, who travel like me, have faced the same without anyone to witness it." A murmur rippled through the audience, subdued but emotional. Nathan continued, his tone softening. "But last night was not only about pain, it was also about courage. A young student chose to record what she saw. A retired officer spoke out when silence was easier. A junior flight attendant risked his career to tell the truth. These voices matter. They remind us that accountability is never the act of one, but the responsibility of many." He let the words sink in. Then he added, "I stand here today not to condemn, but to insist on change. Apex Air has committed to reforms. But let us remember, change is not about protecting reputations. It is about protecting people. Dignity is not a privilege. It is a right." The applause that rose was hesitant at first, then steady, then thunderous. Reporters clapped. Passengers from Flight 482 who had been invited to attend clapped. Even some employees in the back clapped. When it quieted, Nathan closed simply. "May we leave here committed not just to fly higher, but to treat each other better." He stepped back. The cameras lingered on him, the image of a man who had turned humiliation into resolve. Questions flew fast. "Mr. Carter, will you sue the airline? Do you believe racism is systemic in aviation? What reforms do you want to see within the year? Nathan answered carefully. Never inflammatory, always direct. This is not about lawsuits. It is about lasting change. And yes, racism in aviation reflects racism in society. But we are not powerless against it. We change by choosing better every day. The press conference stretched nearly an hour. By the end, hashtags were already trending. Oh, or dignity in the skies. Fly fair. Justice for 482. Olivia Brooks' video, now paired with Nathan's remarks, played on every major network. Commentators debated policy. Passengers shared their own stories, and a national conversation reignited. Outside, as Nathan exited with Laura, a small crowd of onlookers gathered. Some clapped, some shouted words of support, others simply reached out to shake his hand. He met each gesture with quiet gratitude. As he walked toward the waiting car, Michael Harris appeared from the crowd. The former officer extended his hand. You said dignity isn't negotiable. I've been thinking about that all day. You're right. We let little things slide. We lose the bigger fight. Nathan clasped his hand firmly. Then don't let them slide. Not anymore. Michael nodded, eyes glistening. Not anymore. Behind them, Olivia Brooks snapped photos not for headlines, but to keep as her own memory of the night she saw courage firsthand. Daniel Ruiz, reinstated on temporary leave, messaged Nathan quietly. Thank you for speaking. I'll carry this forward. By evening, Apex Air's stock had dipped but not collapsed. Analysts predicted the reforms could stabilize trust long-term. Civil rights leaders praised Nathan's composure. Federal officials announced interest in monitoring Apex Air's new programs. The storm was fierce, but it had not destroyed. It had redirected. That night, alone at home, Nathan sat by his window, overlooking the quiet streets of Riverton. For the first time in 24 hours, he let his shoulders drop, the weight lifting slightly. He thought of every passenger he had seen pass through his airport families, business travelers, students, elders, people carrying hopes, burdens, fears, all of them deserving the same thing, respect. He whispered to himself, not as a director, not as a leader, but as a man, may we treat each other better. The city lights blinked back at him as if in quiet agreement. And though the work ahead would be long, Nathan knew the story of Flight 482 would not be remembered only for its humiliation. It would be remembered for what followed an insistence that dignity could no longer be delayed, deferred, or denied. The story of Flight 482 reminds us that dignity is not a luxury, it's a right we all deserve, no matter where we sit or what title we carry. Nathan Carter's calm but firm response shows that real strength is not in shouting louder, but in holding steady when others try to strip you down. His choice to stand with quiet courage turned a moment of humiliation into a call for reform that reached far beyond himself. For older audiences who have lived through years of change and challenge, this story echoes a familiar truth. Progress doesn't come overnight, but it comes when ordinary people choose not to stay silent, whether in the workplace, in family, or in society. Our small acts of courage, speaking up, refusing to look away, treating others with respect can ripple outward in powerful ways. Life gives us daily chances to choose between silence and truth, between convenience and justice. And like Nathan, we can decide that dignity is never negotiable. Thank you so much for watching and for walking with us through this powerful story. If it touched your heart, if it made you think, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that shine a light on dignity, justice, and hope. Together, we can keep these conversations alive.